It is 11 a.m. in New York City, 4 p.m. in London, 1 a.m. in Sydney. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and welcome to the Virtual Island Summit 2021. This is day 5, and since its inception, the Virtual Island Summit has featured fascinating conversations with people making things happen around the world. And this year's conversation promises to be no different. I am Victor Richardson, your host, and with us today is one of Jamaica's most recognizable political figures. This childhood TV star and former UN Goodwill Ambassador was crowned Miss World in 1993. She made the turn from a career in communications to politics when in 2007 she won her first election, becoming the youngest female member in the Jamaican parliament. She is now in her 4th term. Our guest today was elected chairman for her region in Jamaica for 8 consecutive years and was treasurer of the People's National Party, PNP. She is also a former cabinet minister and now serves as the shadow minister for foreign affairs and foreign trade. Ladies and gentlemen, the Virtual Island Summit is proud to welcome a mother, a wife, a public servant, a newspaper columnist, a businesswoman, and a citizen of Jamaica, the Caribbean, and the world. We welcome the Honorable Lisa Hanna, MP. Welcome, Ms. Hanna, to the Virtual Summit.
Thank you, Victor. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to welcome everyone who's viewing from around the world, not only in Jamaica and the Caribbean, but certainly the Asian Pacific, the African Pacific, everywhere. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
There is so much happening in Jamaica and around the world right now that it's hard to fit it into a 30-minute conversation. But alas, 30 minutes is all the time we have, and so we will make the best of it. So let us begin with the basic tenets of human health and the global pandemic and the fight against the COVID-19 virus. You know the numbers: over 4 million dead worldwide, over 1,500 dead in your own Jamaica, thousands dead across the Caribbean. It is no exaggeration to say that this pandemic has been a tremendous challenge for not only Jamaica, but for the Caribbean and the world. Looking through the dual lens of health and access to health, what do you see are important steps that need to take place in order to further the fight against combating COVID-19?
That's a really deep question. And certainly the answer is not a homogeneous one, because what you do in New Zealand, for example, can't necessarily be replicated in a small island state as Jamaica or even Barbados that is heavily reliant on tourism. And so what this global pandemic has actually demonstrated to countries in our region, which represents, if you look at CARICOM, which is the 15 states of that make up CARICOM in this region, it makes up 8% of the world's population, if you look at it that way. And we are heavily reliant on things like tourism from North America, from Europe. And we are heavily reliant on agriculture. We're heavily reliant on the export of raw materials and certainly remittances. In the case of Jamaica in 2019, we bucked the world trend by Jamaicans overseas sending the most remittances of any country to our country, even though people were losing jobs. But there is something critical that you mentioned, because here it is, a pandemic, a virus less than the size of a full stop that ends a sentence, was really able to wipe out large economies, G7 economies, China, the world's largest manufacturer. So when you consider Jamaica, when you consider Barbados, Trinidad, St. Vincent, that also have issues related to climate change and are trying to position themselves in the world in terms of global trade and trying to diversify their economies to even pivot, and then this happens, it really, really eviscerates not only the psyche of your people, the education, because the recent studies have shown that the Caribbean and Latin America are way behind developed countries in terms of their children being educated because of COVID. And so access to health is one thing, but access to internationally competitive education, no, because we don't have the kind of broadband services that are necessary to transmit educational activities in rural areas like my constituency, for instance. So healthcare is one, access to jobs is another one, and access to education. And then within all of that mix is trying to find the money and the resources to make sure that those who are living on the minimum wage can actually survive. Because when you shut down a country, people say, shut down the country to provide, to make ways for the virus and to solve the issue and to bring the numbers down. But look at the examples that have happened recently. So Jamaica has gone into lockdown again for 2 or 3 days a week. And the CDC has come out recently and said, look, based on where Jamaica is going with its numbers, we wouldn't advise you to travel there. North America is our largest travel market. And then what you also have happening is when you do things like this, those living below the mid or are living on minimum wage, which is less than $47 US dollars a week in Jamaica, they don't have access to work for those 3 days. And so they can't find food. So it's one thing where the healthcare is now stressed because of persons who are contracting the virus. And our public health facilities are stressed, but our education sector is stressed. Children need to go to school. So it's a real conflation of problems that require urgent solutions. And truthfully, the vaccine is one of the most urgent solutions that we have for especially countries like our country, Jamaica, and others in the Caribbean, to really open with serious resolve.
You mentioned there, you alluded to the deeper economic impact of this virus. So let's talk about the price of bread for a moment. And let's focus in on the economic impact of the bread and butter impact of the pandemic. Earlier this week, in an op-ed for the Jamaica Observer, you warned about the quote unquote imminent crisis of inflation looming on the horizon for Jamaica. Mm-hmm. With inflation on the rise in countries all around the world, you write, and I quote, COVID-19 lockdowns, curfews, contraction in tourism, pressure on the exchange rate, increased cost of fuel and commodity prices, decreased business production, and staff layoffs as ingredients in the recipe for the perfect economic crisis. You go on to paint a rather stark and dystopian picture, and eventually you recommend an increase in the minimum wage as a solution to protect and insulate the poor from tough economic times ahead. Let's dig a bit deeper into the rationale for that recommendation. What do you see? How do you think employers in the private sector are going to react to your recommended legislated increase in the minimum wage threshold?
Well, listen, Victor, a rising tide lifts all boats. And the truth is, nobody wants to factor in sometimes paying higher wages. But the truth is, since the economy, the macro economy has been fixed and stabilized, certainly between 2015 and 2017. I mean, Dr. Peter Phillips was a Minister of Finance, really, and played a seminal role in making sure for the first time in our history in Jamaica, we had a fiscal surplus. And for the first time, we were not spending more than we earned. And so everything stabilized. So the business community actually benefited from a couple of things. They benefited from a stable exchange rate. They benefited from a decrease in the transfer taxes, as well as lower interest rates. So the cost of capital actually went down significantly. And so they have benefited. Their profits have gone up. I think it's time that they actually give the poor a break, because the minimum wage in Jamaica has not been moved for a while. And it's 7,000 Jamaican dollars, which amounts to, at our exchange rate, $47 US a week. Now, if you consider with the prices, international commodity prices going up, the disruption in the shipping, just shipping. I mean, some companies, because of the online demand and because of the stimulus checks in the United States, some shipping companies have actually increased their prices to ship containers by 400%. So what you're having in Jamaica, which is a significant import-dependent economy, you're having things like basic foods increase by 50% over the last couple of months. And just since I wrote that article, which came out on Sunday, one of our chicken companies has said, look, we're increasing the price of chicken, which actually happens today, by 5%. So what you're having are these tremendous increases, and it's not going to get easier. South Korea just said, look, we're increasing our interest rates because they're now anticipating the inflation. So what you're going to see happen is people not being able to eat right now, and that's happening. So we have to take a decision as to what is most important in our country, because people will not be able to survive. And I think right now, businesses are doing well. I think it is time to have a social conversation and for the leadership of the country to sit with the private sector organization of Jamaica, for us to sit with the other businesses to say, look, if we don't grapple with this, what you're going to have is a situation that is a tremendous economic crisis and a social fallout in your country where people are not only going to become malnourished, but they're going to get to a point of starvation.
It is said that what we imagine in our minds eventually becomes our reality. So imagine with me for a moment, Ms. Hanna. Imagine a Caribbean political and economic union with a constitution and a parliament. As Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, you know that foreign ministers negotiate with leaders around the world. Imagine if you were elected as foreign minister of such an entity. What key issues would you bring to the global stage on behalf in support of the interests of a Caribbean union?
You know, you're setting me up.
It's a tough one, but
well, you know that CARICOM was formed in 1973 to really just improve the regional integration of our 15 countries. And at that time when it was formed, what you had was a serious divide in the world. And CARICOM had to really, and the countries in this region had to be able to speak on one accord and to not only protect and insulate ourselves, but to demonstrate that we were prepared to stand on the world stage in unity, because speaking as one voice was more powerful than speaking as individual voices. And the truth is, when at that time, the G7 countries were the world's most powerful countries. I mean, they were producing, I think, 47% of the world's manufactured goods. Now, those countries, the United Kingdom, Canada, and I believe Italy, no longer are in that top 7. China is the world's #1 manufacturer. So if you're looking at, you know, where we are as CARICOM, we are actually very, very powerful if you think about it, because as a bloc, we represent 8% of the world's nations. So that's something to really stand up and be proud of. But we have not been using it effectively. And I think even with the CSME, which is a free movement of services and goods throughout the region, we have not realized those recommendations that were there. And even most recently, there was another report that came out which spoke to how we need to take advantage and some of the urgent things that need to go in place for the COVID crisis. I think one of the first things that I would do if I were in that position is really try to remove the non-tariff barriers that are there, that exist for the trade amongst ourselves. Because what we have to recognize is if we were able to export as one entity to the world, let us say we were to come together and say, well, Jamaica, let's use you to produce value-added products in terms of agriculture. Speak to Trinidad, and we speak as one voice. But even before you get there, we have to be able to trust each other. Still, we have Jamaicans and experience issues when trying to do business in some of our countries. I won't name them because I have a tremendous amount of respect for my Caribbean brothers and sisters. But we still have problems. And I think we need to sit down if we're going to be real with ourselves and ask the world to assist us as CARICOM. We need to first recognize that we have to trust each other first and do business with each other first. So to implement all the recommendations under the CSME, implement those recommendations as well that came out of the recent report speaking to what we need to do coming out of the pandemic. So that's as simple as I can put it. I don't want to go any deeper in it.
Okay, let's leave this Caribbean of our dreams and talk now instead about our Caribbean reality.
Mm-hmm.
Caribbean integration obviously makes sense. It is clear that deepened integration would create a more competitive, vibrant, sustainable Caribbean. But of course, you have localism, like you said, you have nationalism, you have competition, you have protectionism, you have different market sizes and different levels of development. Integration is hard. Is it a challenge, Lisa Hanna, worth confronting? And if it is, have Caribbean leaders done enough to make true Caribbean political and economic integration a reality?
They say delay is the deadliest form of denial. And it's not that we don't have the recommendations. There are several reports that are there. I think it's time that we start implementing those recommendations. It's funny, when I knew I was doing this interview, I went back to look for a quote by Sir Sridath Ramphal, the former Commonwealth Secretary General. And here's what he has said, quote, "We have crept through the fractured promises of the Treaty of Chaguaramas and the Declaration of Grants, and through fractured promises, innumerable pious declarations, affirmations, and commitments, the roll call of unfulfilled promises and unimplemented decisions are staggering and shameful," end of quote. All I'm saying is we just need to take the decision to implement the recommendations from all of these different treaties, reports, etc. So that's as simple as I put it, and really, focus on building our exports, breaking down the non-tariff barriers, putting the things in place that really allow for the free movement of goods and services and labor throughout CARICOM. That has to happen.
We are, as you know, citizens of the world. I believe it was President Woodrow Wilson who said the tragedy of our times is that we sometimes forget that. The word citizen carries with it a connotation of staying in touch with our common humanity. As a public servant, you know how important it is to stay in touch with the people you serve. And now we're in COVID. How do you, as a leader and public servant, stay in touch with the people, especially during these times?
It has become increasingly difficult to do it during COVID. And in Jamaica, for instance, members of parliament like myself, they expect you to be on the ground, to do, as we say, press flesh. They want to see their MP. They not only want to hear from their MP, but they want to see them in the communities, to check on them, to see if they're okay. That has been difficult, especially with the lockdowns, but I'm still out there. I still go through the communities. I still deliver care packages. I still check on people. I use my social media pages. I try and, reach out through community leaders, but it has become more difficult, and especially with people being fearful, because fear is probably one of the worst emotions that human beings can experience. And prolonged fear makes it even more dangerous, not only to someone's health, but to their overall well-being and the collective good of a society. And as members of parliament, I think it is imperative that we try to allay people's fears about the vaccine, fears about the future of their children, fears about the future of their own livelihood, uncertainty. There's so much uncertainty in what they believe will happen in their lives. And if I can be a voice, or we can all be a voice to make sure that somehow we make those fears, that we bring down the volume of those fears, even to just sit and listen. That's important. And I would say to everybody, all leaders, whether you're elected or not, I said something recently, especially where children are concerned. Children thrive on predictability and stability. COVID has destroyed that in their lives. And many parents are even unable to discuss with their children to allay their fears. And I think it's even more important to stop and recognize how our children are dealing with COVID, how they're processing it. And sometimes the depression is very, very real in our children now. So to take the time to speak to them too, and to look at your children's mannerisms, if they're having outbursts or bursting into tears or just going silent, it's important to speak to them as well. So yes, we still have to be out there as members of parliament, masking up, making sure we sanitize, but I still have to be on the ground. I can't lock myself away from the people I serve.
You were first elected in 2007 as a woman. There is established and growing evidence that when women are in leadership and political decision making, that it improves those processes. I wonder, who is the first woman you ever heard of or saw in elected office, and how old you were?
The first woman I saw and heard of in elective office was Golda Meir of Israel. I must have been a child. I can't even remember how old I was, but I was so impressed with her that I even named my favorite dog Golda, because I don't know what it was. I couldn't understand her policies as a child, but there was a certain magnetism that I saw that she exuded. And I liked that. I thought she was sincere, which was what I liked. And then over time, I was impressed with Winnie Mandela, even though she was not elected to office, but her activism, her tenacity, her fearlessness, I was really impressed. And then you had Benazir Bhutto, and then Portia Simpson Miller, and there were so many women that I saw that really gave me a sense of stability and pride and inspiration, because I saw them going up against some very, very tough situations. And, even though I'm not aligned with Margaret Thatcher and her policies, I'm not conservative, but I could appreciate what she stood for and how she stood up. So while I didn't agree with some of her things, but I appreciated how she was courageous in making sure she stood up for what she believed in. And now, there's so many. Mia Mottley. Oh my God, I'm so impressed with Mia Mottley. The Prime Minister of New Zealand, and I could go on and on and on. There's so many women leading the world now that are formidable and courageous, and I just give thanks for them.
A few weeks ago, when this VIS conversation was first announced, I began receiving social media DMs, largely from young professionals who dream of entering public service. Obviously, they want advice on how to take that first step, and a lot of them were interested in this conversation, hoping you could dole out nuggets of political wisdom, to help their cause. So if you would indulge me, I'm calling this, as we close, the Spitfire segment of our set.
Look at you with your Jamaican accent.
Yeah, yes. Are you up for the challenge, Miss Hanna?
Sure, but let me hear you say Shaba first.
Shaba.
All right. Well, yeah. All right, you got to know
yes,
that.
I will sing for my bread. Yes. What's the name of your constituency?
Southeast St. Anne.
How many people are registered to vote there?
A little over 31,000.
How many constituency offices do you have?
I have one constituency office.
What time does it open and close?
Well, in COVID, we open at 9, we start seeing people at 10, and we stop seeing people at 4, but we close at 5.
How do you, Lisa Hanna, choose a secretary?
I look for good communication skills. I look for a willing attitude. I look for a pleasing disposition. I look for somebody who can take criticism well. I look for someone who is tenacious in digging deep and using data and not necessarily takes decisions on emotions. And somebody who is computer savvy and is an all-rounder.
What are your 2 top annual Lisa Hanna MP constituency events?
Well, certainly a year ago, it was the Lisa Hanna 4x4 football competition. And we still do our education, free CXC classes and CSEC classes. So I would say those 2, sports and education. We can't do the sport now because of COVID, but we still do the education.
Do you memorize your speeches?
No.
Who is your most admired person?
That's a difficult one because I have several. I just don't have one person. I love music. I admire musicians, politicians, social advocates, mentors, family members. So I'm going to plead the fifth on that one.
What's your favorite quote?
Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you.
What's Lisa Hanna's favorite food?
That would have to be stew chicken and boiled yellow yam with a big piece of Scotch bonnet pepper on the side and right planted.
Are you really friends with Spice?
Yes.
Tell us of a single moment in your life that defined you.
Personally or politically or otherwise?
Personally.
Personally. When I had my son, Alex, and I remember when I was leaving the hospital, and I said to the matron, I said, do I have to sign anything to take him? And she said, no, this is yours for the rest of your life. And I thought, wow, this is a deep, deep statement. And I don't think she understood what she said at that point. And then it all came down. And then I remember when I was going through my divorce, I thought of what she said too, because when you're going through any kind of separation where children are involved, you recognize the legal ramifications of what it means to also have children. And so I think those moments, and my son is a bright, beautiful, successful third-year university student doing finance, but certainly having a child, growing a child through being a baby to a toddler to an adolescent to a university student, and going through all of those things while balancing your life as a politician, a mother, a wife, a businesswoman, going through your own trials and upheavals is the most defining moment, I think. You learn a lot about who you are.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Lisa Hanna MP. That brings us to the end of another fascinating conversation of the Virtual Island Summit. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Until next time, goodbye and be safe.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for having me, guys.